Welcome, everyone, to the second episode of the Deadliest Warrior podcast. I am your host, Craig Taylor, followed by my co-hosts,
Lucas from Green Dice Games.
And Matt Davis.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you here again. Returning off our second episode, Spartan vs. Ninja.
Yeah, I saw our podcast was doing endgame numbers, as Rocco Bodie would say.
It was doing endgame numbers. We got past 60 views. Let's get this one to 100.
Respectable.
Yeah, hey, if you guys want to reach out to the podcast, hit us up on Twitter.
Or in the comment section. We don't have many comments. We'll see all of them.
Right, yeah, we need to get that comment section going, baby.
Let's go for 100K likes on this one, and we'll see what we can do about that.
If I get 100K likes, I'll fight Jake Paul.
Yeah.
I'll call out Floyd Mayweather.
Yeah. All right.
So just judging by the title, you could probably tell we're going to be talking about episode 1, Apache vs. Gladiator today. But before we get into the actual episode, just as a little icebreaker, I kind of wanted to ask you guys, what are some of your earliest memories of Spike TV and Deadliest Warrior at this time, seeing that it is the first episode? I think, Lucas, you sort of mentioned that you had something to say about this, I believe.
Yeah, just kind of like the whole retrospective of looking back on this show now, kind of as like an adult. And when we watched this show for the first time, we were so young and susceptible. And we looked at this show in such high regard that it was like scientific fact, and they knew what they were talking about. But, you know, we're slowly discovering here through the podcast, episode by episode, that it's kind of the opposite is true with this one.
If I can just add, I feel like the perfect 1-to-1 is like WWE. Like,
yeah,
I liked WWE, and then I realized, spoilers, that WWE is all scripted. And right after that, it's like I fell into the same exact trap where like I started watching Deadliest Warrior and just took it on face value. Like, and I rooted for the different warriors.
The Deadliest Warrior helped you get over WWE.
It might have. Yeah, it was like I took up smoking to quit heroin. You know,
do you guys remember your first exposure to the show? Like, was it a trailer, or how did you first hear about it?
Lunch table. I remember all the guys at the lunch table were talking about, and Green Beret versus Spetsnaz was actually spoiled for me because I remember our friend Dan, who hopefully we'll get on this show at some point. Our friend Dan was
probably for that episode, right?
He goes, it was right after that episode. He goes, yeah, Matt, did you see, it's BS, man. What happened did you see like what happened with the Green Beret episode? And I was like, Dan, I have that episode recorded at home. You just spoiled it. Obviously, our boys are going to lose. What the heck?
I mean, what was like the air window for the show, too? A lot of Spike TV, like, it was lumped in with like the 1,000 Ways to Die and stuff, where it was on like 10, 11 o'clock at night.
Yeah, it came on at like 9 or 10.
Okay, I knew it was up around that time.
It was like my parents would make me record it. And then once I got so into it, like they started just letting me stay up and watch it.
The WWE of like historic channel, of historic shows.
Yeah, I have a distinct memory of somebody in our grade. You guys might know who it is. And they came up to me in our 8th grade science class, and he was like, you see the Spartan won. I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? He's like, Spartan won last night. Spartan beat the ninja. I'm like
it was the presidential election or something.
Yeah, and he's like,
or the Super Bowl.
Yeah. So that was my first exposure, and I don't remember how I actually got into it. Probably just you guys. Like, you have to watch this show. Not even from like it's so good. It's like you just have to watch.
Right. It's just something we watch that you have to watch. I used to get so into it, and honestly, I'm kind of glad that like I got to watch it in the magic,
in the heyday.
You know what I mean? Like I got to watch it when it came out, like non-cynically. I mean, like just being able to watch it and like root for a team, and even the nights that I got upset over it, I wouldn't take it back because we're going through and dissecting it now, and it is. I mean, we're getting a lot of humor out of that, but I'm glad it's like I get to experience the show twice, you know?
Yeah, and I would be interested to see what somebody who never watched the show as a kid would think about it.
Oh, yeah, big time.
I still think it's entertaining. I mean, as cynical as we are about it, I think it's a very entertaining show still.
Yeah, we're that's why we're making this. Like, every time we watch an episode, we're laughing, we're cracking up, sending each other Snapchats about like different scenes, and I mean, yeah, it's entertaining.
I'd be curious about that because back then, I mean, we like really took it at face value as like a scientific fact. Like fact is the word that comes to mind. Like this is what would happen if a Spartan and ninja or a gladiator and Apache met.
Yeah.
And I remember every time I watched the show, I would pick like a favorite fighter too. Yep. And I'd be like, come on, man. Come on. He's going to win. And then if he didn't win, I'd be like, this is bullshit. This show sucks. Or if they did win, I'd be like, yeah, that's right. That's right. Like acting like it had anything to do with my life. It's like sports. I was like, yo, I'm the Spartan. I practically beat the ninja.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And if we're to believe Snake Blocker, who we'll get to in a moment, the premiere of Deadliest Warrior, which is what we are discussing, reached all of Spike TV's audience, which was about 90 million people. And for perspective, last Super Bowl had an audience of like 96.4 million.
I can't believe. Congratulations, Spike TV, on pulling those numbers.
Congrats, Paramount, Spike TV.
Would be a national celebrity.
Yeah, if he's not already. So we'll get to him in a moment. So I finally want to move on to the actual commands. So first, I want to start off with the Apache. Matt, can you tell us about some characteristics that were unique to the Apache compared to some other Native American tribes?
Of course. So here's what I found on Wikipedia. And I'm going to preface that because there are probably a lot of actual Native Americans out there.
Here's the white man's
no
Wikipedia perspective, what we could dig up.
Exactly. Please don't crucify me in the comments section.
Correct us in the comments if you want.
It's just a little bit about the Apache. So they're a collection of a variety of tribes. Apache's kind of like, it's like Lucas just said, like it's a white man term that they came up with to describe all these, this group of tribes. But we hear it in the episode, like Alan Tafoya is full-blooded Hickory Apache, different thing. And they say Snake Blockers clan as well, but I don't remember what they say. Something like that. So historically, they lived in modern day West Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, and northern Mexico, right? They're still around today in the American Southwest. And the reason I wanted to bring up their geography is because I think it really lends to the Apache character. It's really tough and dangerous terrain. They lived in mountains, they lived in deserts. And so they were dealing with a whole host of like hostile animals, hostile environments, and there was a whole lot of enemies they came into contact with. I mean, you have the Free Texans, you have other Native American tribes, you have the Spanish, Mexico, and then eventually the American government.
And disease.
Disease coming from the colonials, of course.
Well, not even like, I didn't mean that like as that like they had to battle disease and everything else out in the wilderness too.
Of course. Yeah. Well, life of a Native American, right? What makes them unique? This show sort of gives a mystique to the Apache that they're like a warrior race. They call them in the beginning of the episode that they use the phrase like scalp taking assassin. Sometimes Apaches did take scalps, but that was mainly other Native American tribes. And if you look at the history, it was a whole lot of the Mexican army and the American army scalping Apaches, actually. So I thought which was a technique they learned from other Native American tribes. So a little bit unfair to categorize the Apache as like this savage, barbaric warrior, but they definitely have a warrior culture. And you see that they fight a lot of different enemies throughout history. They fought the Spanish in the 1600s. And then they fought the Comanches before that, their neighboring tribe.
Coming up on a future episode?
Yes, right. Yeah, the Comanches, season 2. And eventually they start to play a role in the United States Army. So the last battle they fight against the United States is, you've heard, I think most Americans have heard of a guy named Geronimo, was an Apache warrior. Geronimo's War was known as the last conflict in the Apache War. And once they stopped fighting, the American government started utilizing the Apache because they were renowned for their fighting skills and their strategic, strategic tactics. So,
on that note,
Right.
one of the claims by the show is that the Apaches are the forerunner of today's special forces. Is there any truth to that?
there's some truth to that. So the Rangers have a different background. The Navy SEALs have a different background. But the U.S. Army Special Forces, from some of my research, does originate from the Apaches. So
Anything in
there's
particular?
What's that?
Anything in particular that you saw that?
So there was the United States Army Indian Scouts that were established in 1866. And they were considered a unique and elite force. They were known for employing their own tactics on the battlefield. And they were used in the United States Army all the way up until 1943. After they were disbanded, the U.S. Army Special Forces was created, and they use the same insignia that the Indian Scouts used. And you can see it on the Green Beret insignia today. It's a pair of crossed arrows. So after the Army Indian Scouts came what are called the Alamo Scouts. You can look these guys up. They were a top secret reconnaissance and raider unit. They operated in the Southwest Pacific during World War II. And they're really considered like the forerunners to modern special forces. I found a lot of that out from a particular website. We normally don't name drop sources on here because we find a lot on Wikipedia. But, maybe we can splash the web link up on a thumbnail or something. It's like, because to read the link out is a bit clunky. So yes, there's definitely a lot of truth to the idea that the Apaches directly influenced the creation of the special forces in the United States. Obviously, there's other things influencing those creations, but the Apaches specifically, what they were used for in the United States Army was highly influential.
Interesting.
Yeah, I know. I was completely shocked to find the Leash Warrior dropping some actual facts.
I know. So I want to turn over to you, Lucas, with the Gladiators. So one of the things that you mentioned is that the Gladiator that's on the show is actually a combination of multiple different versions of a Gladiator.
Oh, yes. The Gladiator, the battlefield brute. This show, there's a can here. I gotta take off the lid of the can and unpack about 40 layers here. In real life, there was like 25 different types of gladiators I could find, all with their own different names, different equipment. The show kind of mismatches about what I could find. Maybe like, I have my best guess of what the show was taking as like face value, as this is like what a gladiator is, but it's kind of a combination of like most of those 25.
Yeah. Can you, Luke, if I could just ask you, what do you mean by like class of gladiator?
Like different culture or?
Yeah, just depending on different backgrounds, why that gladiator was fighting, whether they were high social class, whether they were slaves, depended on, or even just the show itself, whether they were putting on a show, really determined what type of weaponry they were using. I mean, the gladiator at its roots was a performer, essentially. They were in an arena, they were there, whether they killed each other or not, it was just maiming. I mean, it was a very brutal form of entertainment is what all it boiled down to.
Yeah. So these classifications, were they instilled at the time of the gladiator, or researchers just put them in these different groups as they discovered more about the gladiators?
From what I could find in my research, it's just a lot of the names that were given to the gladiators were from like their backgrounds or their social class or the very specific weaponry that they used. A lot of them were nicknames and stuff that were given by the Roman people to that gladiator, or just what they were like street word street talk what they were referred to by, like, oh, the blah 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 is fighting tonight.
So it was kind of like a particular fighting style or like particular weapons that they used.
It just boiled down to what armor they were wearing, what weapons they were using, and let me tell you, the show gets a lot of it wrong.
I'm very interested because I went into this thinking like the Gladiators, if I can just say, like, the Apache, I mean, it's just describing a group of people, but we know they're talking about an Apache warrior. A gladiator is like an entertainer, right? I know they had to fight to the death, and as all things on the show, I wouldn't want to have to fight a gladiator, right? But like, it's all their weapons seem like really goofy. And I just don't know that the Apaches bring in a whole lot of practical stuff to the fight. The Gladiators got like a glove with a scissor, a razor on it or something.
We'll unpack a lot of it later. And a lot of the weapons that they tackle in the show are specialized weapons for specialty types of shows that the Gladiators would put on. Yeah. A lot of it was to the death. So it was, essentially, a warrior fighting. But there's so many classifications of gladiators. You could almost have a show in itself called Deadliest Gladiator. Like, how did they boil down, a couple weapons to pick out of this entire plethora? And I'll unpack it a little bit later when we get there. But some of the most iconic weapons that gladiators used, they didn't even touch on in this show. They kind of chose some very obscure ones for some reason, which didn't really make sense to me.
Yeah, interesting. So
the battlefield brute.
Yeah. So getting into the matchup a little bit, this might be a difficult question, so both of you guys can kind of chime in. What is the age discrepancy between these two warriors? Because if you're talking like individuals like Shaka Zulu and William Wallace, you can obviously delineate their lives, but for Apaches, they're still around. So how would you compare?
I like that question. So a really great question. So the Apache is like unique on Deadliest Warrior in that the Apache theoretically spans like from the Stone Age to modern day. Like, you can have like, and they show on the episode too, you've got Stone Age weapons and Iron Age weapons as well. So I think that's the window they're trying to stick to, right? But I mean, the Apaches fought with gunpowder, when colonials came over in like 1600s, and they fought the American army with lever action rifles, and obviously what we talked about fighting in World War II, they were using modern weaponry. So I think the Apache they're trying to give us is trying to span like Stone Age weapons and Iron Age weapons, which is they're reaching. That's a really big period of time because the Apaches don't get Iron Age weapons until they come into contact with colonials. I'll put it this way. The time that the Apaches would have had iron weapons would be around the same time they'd be getting access to like guns. So it's, in a way, it's fair to the Gladiator, I guess, because they're like in the Stone Age, but also they're coming from like a way farther period of time, like in the future. Yeah.
So, Lucas, where would you put the Gladiators on Deadliest Warrior in terms of like a year?
So the Gladiator pretty much era was from the 1st century BC to up about the 4th, 5th century AD. So it's definitely really old. We're talking like year 400, 300 AD. So,
so you think like, so is the Gladiator like kind of spanning with all of Roman history? Because what we know is Rome spanned for many different iterations, like there was a republic, there was an empire, an Eastern and a Western. Like, well, are you saying like Gladiators probably hung around for the entirety of like Roman rule?
I'd say most of it, yeah, from what I've seen. And they changed through the different 25 classes too. All of those classes didn't exist at the same time. Some of them were phased in and phased out, and it was whatever was popular through Roman culture at that time. And their weaponry was a little bit it was like iron and bronze essentially at the beginning, and they actually were some of the first people that had like a hybrid steel where they would put iron in between carbon because they realized that they could harden it. But from what I've seen, they were very poor at doing this. It was their workmanship, their craftsmanship was very shoddy, so their weapons were not the best.
So if I could just like interject, I noticed that the Gladiator armor on the show, what little of the armor there is, I guess we'll talk about
they got that wrong.
Yeah, what little armor there is labeled as bronze, but then for a lot of their weapons, it's labeled as steel. I don't know if that's a case of, I mean, they called the Spartan sword steel forged steel, but
it's not steel that we think of as like industrialized steel today. From what I can see, they took kind of like
steel, right?
It was, it was a very barbaric form of steel that was like iron that was hardened in between carbon, and it was it was like hardened more than iron, but it's not anywhere near like if you go out and buy something steel today, it's not going to have the same threshold.
Interesting. So a lot of information, background on our warriors. So I want to get into the experts, and I want to start with the Gladiators because they might win the award for the least memorable experts on Deadliest Warrior. So what I could find on Chris Torres, he is touted as an ancient weapons specialist. Now, according to Snake Blocker on snakeblocker.com, which is not a joke, it's a real website.
Go, please do yourself a favor and check it out.
Yeah. He works as a stuntman and actually trained with Chuck Liddell in MMA. So kind of interesting work there.
Maybe he was there to get Chuck on the show.
Yeah, likely. So he worked on video games, presumably mocap. I saw a few games he worked at on his IMDb. And Snake did say he was an authority on Gladiator history, but there's no mention of his expertise that I can find. So I also saw he worked on a History Channel show about ancient warriors, which seems on par with Deadliest Warrior in terms of like the credentials. So I think he may just be a history buff. You know what I mean? He's not like a professor, but he's just really into ancient warriors, maybe. So
that's Chris Torres.
Yeah, Chris Torres.
The only thing I could find on him really is he was on a lot of like tattooing TV shows as an actor. He was on like Best Ink and stuff. So
Ink Master.
Yeah. So I guess he's real into tattoos. Is
a genre of Spike TV show. Is the tattoo show.
Yeah, Gladiators, they're known for their tattoos, man.
He's a modern Renaissance man. Ancient history and tattoos. So moving on to Steve Dietrich. He is listed as a Gladiator combat instructor. And my suspicion is that he consulted for ancient Gladiator movies, so he's an actor and stuntman. There's not, even the show doesn't really call him like a historical expert. I think he just may know how to wield these weapons, which I think there's nothing wrong with that. So, Lucas, you found something?
Yeah, Steven here, he was really difficult to find anything on, and I found a very obscure kind of article referencing him that he did 13 years of Renaissance festivals as like the weapons master who would display the fighting techniques. Okay. So, a little bit interesting, not probably as close as you're going to get to like modern day, combat like that, demonstrating it. But Renaissance Festival, man, Steven.
I like a stunt guy.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, he's an actor.
Like most people on this show.
Right, like most experts on this show.
Yeah. So the third Gladiator expert is actually Chuck Liddell, who I accidentally typed as Cock Liddell on my phone. My notes.
What website did you go to?
I left it because I thought it was funny. I didn't bother researching him because I think most people know who he is. Although on his Wikipedia page, and I'll put this in the edit, I found this picture of him that I refuse to believe is not a wax figure. It's one of the strangest things I've ever seen. It's got an aura about it. He's like a cake or something.
Chuck Liddell he's not a beauty queen.
No.
He's a fighter, that's for sure.
He 21, 8, and 0. He is from an era of UFC. If you're a fan of UFC at all, Chuck Liddell. He was in just that like kind of early era. I mean, UFC started in the 90s, and he was in kind of that like early 2000s where he was real big era, where he was one of like the big names, had a lot of big fights. Yeah, I mean, his name just kind of carries some weight, even if like his record doesn't maybe carry as much weight as it should. His name definitely carries some weight.
Yeah, Luke and I are both MMA fans, and every time I watch this episode and Chuck Liddell shows up, I just start cracking up because it's like seeing an old football player show up on something. It's like, oh, we got MVP quarterback Michael Vick, you know, and you're like, well, this is like a different era, you know. This is really funny. So yeah, it's always good. I don't know why he's on, other than just it's fun to have him on.
Because he's a modern day gladiator.
He's a modern day gladiator, yeah.
I guess.
So they bring him on to punch a side of beef.
Oh, yeah. We'll get to that.
We'll get to that. Moving on to the Apache experts, which are infinitely more interesting.
Way more entertaining.
So we're going to start with Alan Tafoya. So he is a world knife fighting champion, and that did check out. I've seen multiple sources saying he's a 2-time champion of the Soldier of Fortune Knife Fighting Championship.
I was really surprised by that. 1, I had no idea there was championship knife fighting. 2, I Googled, how do you get into knife fighting? And then 3,
you were looking at brands to buy.
Yeah, I was just baffled that that's a real thing. Like when they first said that in the episode, they're like, he's a championship knife fight. I'm like, bullshit, man.
Yeah. He seems like a cool dude. Like he's someone I'd want to have a beer with, I think. Like,
yeah. Did you see anything else about Alan?
Just that he's an actor, like a lot of these people, but unlike a fraudulent actor who's posing as an expert, I think he is actually a combat expert.
He is actually a producer also. And he was famous for the movie MacGruber, which I thought was hilarious.
So I was going to say, the stuff I found on Alan is that he's the son of a chief. He is full-blooded Hickory Apache. And so he probably does know a lot of like Apache history. It's probably the reason they get as much right on this episode as they do.
Yeah.
And
I mean, he literally is the warrior.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
That's rare.
He's an actor, a director, and a producer from what I saw. He is a producer on MacGruber. That is true.
I love that.
That'd be funny if on his lower third when he introduced him.
Hey, don't hold that
MacGruber producer.
Don't hold that against him, people. Everybody's got to make some money, you know. We've all had that job. So, Alan Tafoya, I think, checks out mostly on what they're talking about.
Yeah, I agree. And then finally, we get to the main event.
Oh, yes.
They would wait to the last possible minute within a few feet of the enemy, and at the exact same time in unison, all the Apaches would do their war scream.
I'm going to try very hard to not turn this into the Snake Blocker podcast because we're about a half hour in. But I would be remiss if I did not cover this guy. So starting out, he's introduced as a U.S. Army combat instructor. And I would describe, from my research, Snake Blocker as a Joe Exotic type figure. So if you look at his Wikipedia page, his resume might rival Jeff Demoulin.
Oh, yeah.
So it's likely entirely written by him.
Snakeblocker.com. His IMDb bio is amazing.
Yeah. The Wikipedia page mentions everything from his fighting to his well-received poetry, quote, well-received poetry.
Yes. I saw him described as a warrior poet somewhere.
Yes, by someone who's not Snake Blocker had said that. And on his award section on Wikipedia, you would think that he was like Winston Churchill or like Albert Einstein. His awards list everything from like combat instruction to like community service.
Yeah.
So you already know that unless Wikipedia is just super detailed with their obscure, combat instructor information, that's probably him entering that.
Scroll down. It's like last edited by Snake Blocker 1, Snake Blocker like 2, not Snake Blocker. This isn't Snake Blocker.
Snake Blocker, but with like a 0 as the O.
Yeah. And also by Snake Blocker with a 0. This is something, I think this was his Wikipedia page, or maybe his IMDb says, Blocker, in his free time, likes to read and watch movies. His favorite movies tend to be comedies, action films, and documentaries.
Same.
Blocker is passionate about family time, socializing with his network of friends. So, not written by him.
Snake Blocker, if you're listening, I just leave us a comment.
Teach me your ways.
No, send us a tweet. I would love to have you on the show, dude.
I agree.
Yeah. Snake Blocker is such an entertaining character, and I think he has to crack our, at least for right now, our top 10 expert list.
I got a question for you guys. Do you think that's actually, like, that name was properly given to him, like, handed down? Or do you think he made that name
So
up?
if you read his bio, I think Blocker is, like, the English translation, I think, of his last
I didn't see anything about
name.
translation notes,
Okay.
but he has a blurb on his website about what it means.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
It's extensive. It is like
It almost
sounds-
the meaning of the snake.
Yeah.
And wow, I mean,
It sounds like cock blocker to me, is what I think of.
Yeah, maybe. Now, the next section of Snake Blocker is how there are some discussions about how he may not be legit. And there's a couple of disclaimers. One, I'm not an expert on Native American history.
Yeah.
And two, I'm not an expert on combat. So this is not me judging his combat skills. From all I know, he is, this is what a championship combat instructor looks like. So, but there are some forum posts saying how they may have taught him some very basic martial arts on some military base. One other piece of evidence is how a lot of the moves he teaches in the self-defense classes have really dumb and obvious names. Like, watching a video where there's like a knife move where you just slightly move your wrist, and he calls it like the snapping turtle.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll get to the piercing buffalo. And I think that these are the names I would give these things if I knew nothing about Native American history and someone said to name them.
I think they intro him as like a black belt in, it's like 6 martial arts. I am not saying he doesn't have that, because we don't know anything from our research. Like, we're going off forum posts here.
Yeah.
That's why I'm saying, like, Snake, if you're out there, hit us up. Because I certainly don't want to tarnish anybody's name.
I agree.
To be a 6, like, have 6 black belts takes
That's like Bruce Lee.
Yeah, like, what does it take? Doesn't it take like a 20-year minimum to become a black belt in jiu-jitsu?
I was going to say that. You see UFC fighters as an example, because they're proven and legit. A lot of them will hit the professional level before they're even a black belt in one jurisdiction.
A lot of them are brown belts.
Yeah, they'll receive their black belt after winning like a UFC title. They'll come out and their master will present them like, oh, here's your black belt. And they're like 29 years old.
Yeah. And of course, I do want to add Snake Blocker, because we're having some fun at Snake Blocker's expense here, because he is an extremely entertaining like expert on this episode. Just some of his mannerisms and the stuff he does. I'm sure we're going to bring it up, like the Apache War scream. He might not have had control over how they announced him. You know, like, I could see the show editing that in, like telling, oh, he's a master in 1 martial arts. Say he's like a master in 6. You know what I mean? Like, that might have been out of his control or something, how they edit the footage, or
screw you, you'll believe it.
Right. Yeah. So
I will say this. One other last piece of evidence about his legitimacy is just the sniff test. If looking him up online, and as deep as I've gone on Snake Blocker, if someone is working as hard as he is to curate an image of being legit and being an expert, it sort of starts to smell a little bit funny. Like, Barry Jacobson is not going in writing his own Wikipedia post or page. Like, there's something to be said about someone who is trying to curate a very specific image and going on every single popular resource to write their own blurb about themselves in the third person.
Yeah.
So that doesn't mean he's fake, but it sort of smells a little bit funny.
Yeah.
But like Barry, it was very easy to find an article written by someone else on a major website that, like, about an event or something that was going on that he was the historical advisor for.
Well, even like Alan Tafoya, there's so much information about. And yeah, everything, the only stuff we can find about Snake Blocker is like his bio, which is, it doesn't say is written by him, but sounds like it's written by him, because it's full of like very intimate details about like his childhood and stuff. And snakeblocker.com, which who do you think runs that? You know what I mean?
One final point about Snake Blocker, and it's what I'm going to call the Yumpu article. There's a website, yumpu.com. I would turn on
cryptojacking.
Yeah, I would turn on your safe search. From what I went on yumpu.com, just the homepage, and it's some sort of British magazine is what came up. But what I found was one of the strangest pieces of writing I've ever read. It postulates that Deadliest Warrior is like MMA, but with like ancient masterminds combined with Tales from the Crypt, and that someone should make a theme park dedicated to Deadliest Warrior, and that's the editor note.
Now that part I agree to.
Yeah, well, obviously,
but hire us as the host of that park.
Yeah, but there's the rest of the article. Page 1 is an editor's note. The rest of the article is written by Snake Blocker, and there are a few points that he made that I thought were interesting. Again, it's very strangely written, and this could all be fake, but let's just take them as true because they don't sound necessarily fake. So, point 1, he mentioned that each expert speaks on camera for about a half hour about the history of their warrior, and they cut it down to like a couple minutes, which I imagine is what they play in between, tests. Snake did request to hold a live snake when he's explaining poison-tipped arrows. However, they downgraded it to a live scorpion.
Yes, there's one shot where he's getting interviewed and he's holding a scorpion, and he's like,
"It's a blink if you miss it."
Yeah, Apaches weren't afraid of anything.
Let me tell you about that scene. I have never in my life believed more that was a fake scorpion.
Yes, I think it was
it's blatantly like a dollar store prop.
That does not mean Snake Blocker didn't ask for a real one, though, and they just didn't want him accidentally getting poisoned on set. But
yeah, well, we'll put the picture up. It does not move, so we don't need footage.
There's like a price tag hanging off its tail.
If you zoom in, it says "Made in China."
Yeah.
So that was interesting. And the third point, which if this is real, I think this is fascinating, that the experts actually film 2 conclusion segments, one where the warrior wins and another where the warrior loses. And Snake Blocker says he didn't know who won until like the day before at like some kind of premiere party.
Wow.
So there's two takeaways I have from this. One, that Deadliest Warrior and who won was so secretive. It's like how Game of Thrones filmed like 5 different endings, so like no one knew what the real one was. Deadliest Warrior has the same level of security in terms of
amazing
as Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
And the other point is that somewhere out there, I mean, it's probably deleted by now, there's a reality and footage of the ninja winning and come back and kill him in his sleep was never said.
Wow. I don't like that. And what would Snake Blocker have said if the Apache lost? Can you imagine?
Probably it's just a simulation.
Yeah.
It's one of the defenses that comes up often.
He, Craig, you jumped right to like, oh, they wanted to keep the results secret. My mind immediately jumped to, is there no sim and they don't pick a winner until like post-production? And
hey guys, which ending looked better?
Right, yeah, they're like, let's see, who do we want? And they like flip a coin in like the editing room and decide.
So, I mean, there's so many things that go across your mind. It's hard to believe because because they're all actors, so I guess it makes sense. Yeah. But a lot of the reactions seem genuine. We're like, they're pissed but they're actors.
Yeah.
So I'm going to keep that in mind going forward. Again, this is from yumpu.com, so take that with a grain of salt. But according to an article on yumpu.com written by Snake Blocker, there are multiple end scenes. So,
all right. Well, I tell you what, I'm ready to get into some of these weapons.
Oh yeah.
Yes. So, without further ado, only like 40 minutes in, I had to get all my bits about Snake Blocker in there. By far the most amount of time I spent on this episode in terms of research. So, moving to close range, we have the Tomahawk against the Kestis and Scissor.
You want me to get Tomahawk out of the way first so that...
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. Did you have anything more to say? I'm sorry.
Just setting the scene. Snake Blocker is wearing a wife beater and jeans to demonstrate. He has like a bandana, I think. And maybe as a starter question, Matt, would a tomahawk make a skull explode?
What a question.
I mean, I've never done it firsthand, but I don't think it would explode quite the same as it does on the show. I think it's important to note they use the same ballistic gel twice in a row. You can see that. So Snake Blocker hits the ballistic gel head with the tomahawk, right? And the back part of the skull flies off to the side. And then you can see they have it rigged up where they just took that piece and like kind of stuck it back on there. You can see it's like loosely stuck back there. And so when he comes up and hits it from the back, hitting it from the back to the front, of course that part of it flies off because it's already disconnected. So no, probably not. I don't think a rock on a stick is going to make your head explode. Quite like a 12 gauge shotgun blast or something. But
any interesting history on the tomahawk that you found?
Yeah. So the tomahawk, I mean, a lot of people in America know what that is because it was the quintessential weapon of like all Native Americans. It was a tool and a weapon that was used by almost every tribe. And one of the problems with the Apache weapons I had in researching is that they're very like custom. There's a whole lot of different shapes and sizes. You can have a tomahawk that's like a two-handed swinging tomahawk, or you can have a tomahawk that's small, fits in your belt loop, and is made for like throwing or chopping small sticks. You know what I mean? So I'm just going to go what they show us on the show. They say tomahawks made of bone, stone, or iron blades. And we see Alan Tafoya throwing some iron blades. And we see Snake Blocker hammering away with one stone blade and then one that is, they say it's made from the jawbone of a horse. Now, I cracked up when I watched that because I thought there's no way that prop is made from the jawbone of a horse. And maybe it's not. But what they're trying to reference is something that it was actually unique to the Apache, something called a Jawbone Club. I'm going to talk more about the Jawbone Club when we get to the War Club, so I won't spend too much time on it right here. All I'll say about the Tomahawks is, I mean, yeah, what they show, it can be used for melee, it can be used for throwing. I think it's a little... We already mentioned the difference between like a stone and an iron weapon. It's a little interesting that they kind of give the Apaches like, what does the Apache get in the sim? You know what I mean? Because iron, I don't know, like, do they say what if the Gladiator has a shield or not? Because he does in the reenactment, but they never test it.
I will harp on that plenty. All right,
so
go ahead, save that for me. Save that for me.
I'll leave that to you. I guess all the more I'll say is Tomahawk, they pretty much get it right on the show. Like, it's a Native American weapon used for melee and for throwing. And Alan Tafoya knows how to throw one, and it all checks out. So, yeah, it's a good weapon.
Yeah. Iconic, if I may say so. I guess next move on to the Castus and Scissor. Maybe to set the scene, we have the guy in the red shirt. He doesn't do too much. We failed to mention last episode that nerdy ass kid.
There's random people that just show up in the background.
Yeah, the first season.
Yeah.
I wanted to learn more about them, so hopefully our research takes us down that path.
If you're the guy in the red shirt helping Jeff Damelin and you're listening to this, leave a comment. Leave a comment down below.
Your life has led to nothing except looking up obscure podcasts where you're mentioned. Yeah. Just typing in Deadliest Warrior, hoping you appear in one of the works.
And I know what you're thinking. Don't lie. If you think you're going to pretend to be the guy in the red shirt, don't fucking do it.
Yeah, whatever you do, don't leave a like and comment saying I'm the guy in the red shirt.
Do not do that.
I'm the guy.
Yeah. And of course, this is the entry point for the Iceman. Jacques Liddell.
Jacques
Liddell, the Iceman.
So, well, I'll ask you this, Lucas, as a starter question. Does Chuck Liddell punching the side of a cow add anything to the simulation besides cross-promoting Spike's UFC content at the same time?
Does it get my blood flowing? Does it get me excited for the upcoming UFC event? Yes. Does it have anything to do with the show? No. Is it just there as product placement? Probably.
Can I just say that I'm going to shit on your warrior for a second. The Kestis and the scissors are the most useless things I've ever seen. Like,
Hold up.
Useless against the Tomahawk. I'm sorry.
Oh, I play Call of Duty and I used the Tomahawk.
I'm just saying, what we got, please elaborate to me.
Oh, I'll elaborate the crap out of this. Okay, according to yumshit.com. That was a joke.
Yumpoo.com.
We're right off the bat. We're taking logic here. We're crumbling up into a little ball and we're tossing it right out the window because the Kestis and the scissor were such rare weapons for a gladiator. They were very specialty weapons. The Kestis here itself, there used to be slave fights, essentially. They would take the lowest of the low, the people who were enslaved, and make them pretty much, they would put on what would be like boxing gloves today. They were kind of like ghetto made leather wraps, and they would literally have the slaves punch each other to death for people's enjoyment. But it was looked at as one of the most boring forms of combat, commonly low crowds and a lot of booze. And so their way of stepping this up was to add spikes and commonly blades wrapped into the leather wrappings to essentially have the slaves beat each other to death. Absolutely horrible, terrible. And that is where the Kestis was born, was just a way of slaves to beat each other to death and get less booze. Regular, like noble, actual fighting gladiators, a lot of them were prisoners, but anyone above slaves didn't really use this weapon at all. So
one thing I want to know, this is just a question for the audience to ask themselves. How does the gladiator decide in the sim which to use? Like when the Apache gets close, is it like an algorithm that's random? Like, I'm going to pull out the Kestis this time, or this time I'm going to put on my scissor that I have attached to my belt. Like, I know no one can answer that, but the God Emperor Max Geiger. Sorry, Luke. I just wanted to. It's something that's always bugged me about this episode is they test both the Kestis and the scissor, and it's like, well, which one would the Apache use? Like,
would the scissor even be mobile? It's like the size of a car muffler.
Yeah,
I'll get to that
because one's clearly more deadly than the other one, but like, also, who the hell wants to carry that thing around? Just pull out a sword.
See, this is where a lot of the problems come in with the gladiator character. I do want to point out during the Kestis test, they bring in half of a cow, and he says, if you break a rib, you would break a human rib. Let me tell you something about cow ribs. They're about 4 times the size of a human rib.
Well, in Armand's defense, Dr. Armand.
Yeah.
Maybe he's saying if you break a cow's rib, then you've definitely broken it.
You've definitely made it through.
But the first time you hear it, it does sound like he's saying they're about the same size.
It's not even close. Well, the thing is, I'll touch on the scissor now too. It was used by a gladiator called, drum roll please, the scissor, or sorry, Caesar, as they say. It was just another specialized weapon. It was a very, like, you had your gladiator fights, and then maybe once as like a very special show, someone would come out with the Caesar. And they were used actually in conjunction with a sword, which I'm going to get to when we cover the swords here. It wasn't used by itself. And there was actually very little info on this. I had a lot of trouble researching it because it was so not used at all. It's the Kestis and the scissor. They were such specialty weapons that were not used by regular gladiators at all. They're kind of just null and void to me, honestly. It's just such a special scenario, and the only people that those people would fight were also using that same weapon. It's just such, I mean, there's a reason you look at them and you're like, this weapon looks ridiculous. No one would use this, because the only person who's going to use it is the guy you're facing.
Yeah, it sort of points to the matchup where an Apache is fighting for normal warlike reasons, whereas the gladiator is really only fighting other evenly matched opponents in a sport like, a sport atmosphere. So the reasons for fighting and the way the weapons are designed are totally different.
To call someone a gladiator is for sport. It's like a soldier can go out and battle for war, and he's a soldier. If that soldier comes back and says that I want to entertain and I want to fight, maybe, like a lion or something in an arena, they are a gladiator. I mean, it is a name associated with the sport of combat. It is like calling someone a UFC fighter. You wouldn't put a UFC fighter on the front lines, of a military. It's just, it doesn't translate.
I get what you're getting at, Luke. It's sort of a weird matchup, because I don't know as though I wouldn't say that a gladiator is a warrior, but like it's weird because Apaches were fighting, they're fighting in war. They're fighting against opponents who have guns. They're fighting against people for their homeland. And so they're coming with everything they got. Anything and everything that they can do to kill their opponent or scare them off, like they're doing it. The gladiator is there in a very specific thing. He's in an arena fighting other gladiators or one gladiator for the purpose of like entertainment. And he is fighting himself to stay alive, right? But it's like, it's not war. You know what I mean? Like if a gladiator saw an Apache in real life, right, he'd run away, come he'd
come back and kill him.
He'd probably be like, yo, I got no beef with you, dude. Like, I just want to go home. And it's not like he's out there just jonesing for a fight. Like these guys are fighting like against their will, most of them.
It's like, do you ever see those political cartoons where it's like a MAGA guy and like a BLM supporter, and it's like a Ben Garrison, and they're like hugging each other.
Oh, yeah.
And they're like, the man wants to keep us apart. That's what would happen if Apache saw a gladiator.
I mean, just the gladiator itself, like a lot of their loadout, to use a Call of Duty, where their loadouts were just essentially kind of dumb. They weren't very practical because they were used a lot for entertainment.
Yeah.
Which I'll
hence the
I vote we move on here because I got some loadouts to cover.
Hence the Kestis and the scissors, which Armand Dorian is very impressed that the scissor goes through a side of beef. I was horrified. Like, how do you even wear that stupid thing? Is there a little handle inside?
I guess so. My favorite, he puts it through the side of beef, and then he struggles to pull it back out, and they do a hard cut to where he has it back out.
It's clear you got it.
So what do we think about the edge for the Apache?
Yeah, they gave the edge to the Apache for the Tomahawk. Now, I don't like, Max Geiger says the phrase, first of all, he tells Armand Dorian,
because the Tomahawk offers a lot of options, you're going to have to give the edge to the Apache in close.
I don't buy it. I have yet to see any weapon go through a side of beef like that scissor did.
Doctor, you got to think with the clarity of a scientist.
He has to think with the clarity of a scientist, which Dorian's a doctor, so. But he says, close range, the nimble Apache is going to take down the clumsy gladiator, which I think is such terrible, awful logic, and I hate it.
That is an idiotic line because there was a lot of gladiator classes that were like praised for their speed and nimbleness.
Just because the actor they hired to play the gladiator is a big buff dude doesn't mean he wouldn't be like fast. But I do agree with the edge. I do agree that because you can throw tomahawks, you can carry multiple ones. Like you can throw a tomahawk, and even if you got a melee one, it's an axe. Like you can get a reach advantage on a guy with, a boxing glove. And what would you rather have? Would you ever want to strap that scissor to your hand against a guy that's got an axe? I'm not saying you couldn't like make it happen. It's just, there's a reason the Tomahawk gets more kills in the sim. Like,
I want you to put yourself in the shoes. You're a doctor, and you went to school for like what 10 plus years.
Yeah.
You get on a TV show for some extra bank because you need another mansion, and this 21-year-old computer whiz tells you need to think more like a scientist.
Oh my god.
The fact that he held it together and kept his hand in his pocket is pretty incredible.
Against the clumsy gladiator.
Yeah.
Max, no wonder you were replaced, dog.
Oh, dang. Don't be saying that. We got to get Max on this show.
Max,
please come on the show.
Person to come on the show.
He's our number one guy.
Yeah. Lucas, anything to say about the Edge?
See, I just have such a problem with like the entire Gladiator perception. I have no problem with giving the Edge to the Tomahawk because it's just the Kestis is useless. The scissor is just such an obscure weapon that the Tomahawk wins.
It's bizarre to me that like the Gladiator gets 2 weapons at close range and the Apache gets 1.
The Kestis is completely useless.
Yeah,
in what scenario is that? Are you going to strap this little stupid leather thing on your hands?
I feel like they
and try to punch someone.
Did that weapon because they got Chuck Liddell on.
Yeah, I think that was the plug.
Only reason, because the scissor is clearly like, even if you're going to choose one of those two, like the scissor is clearly deadlier. Right,
it protects your hand and it has a blade on it. I mean, and like if you think about it, it's a weird weapon, but it's not useless. Like it has, like you could use that.
Yeah, no,
right.
I get what you mean. I get what you're saying.
Right. So I think we're all in agreement.
Yeah.
Nothing I have to add about the Edge.
You know,
with you guys.
I've chopped a log or two with a tomahawk in the woods. Effective.
Yeah. So moving on to mid range, the Apache weapon. I'm gonna try to pronounce this right. The knife.
Actually, it's a knife. You call it. Sorry.
I think it's knife juto.
Oh, you know what? I forgot to mention before we move on. We have to talk about Snake Blocker's combo routine to impress Chuck Liddell.
Oh yes.
Big cows don't move, you know. When you got something going at this speed, going in with knives, going in with axes, and going in with
we'll see.
When he comes up, doesn't really make a cogent point. He just wants to do this cool little flurry against the bag. Not even the post production team wants to give him any sort of sound effects to make him sound cooler.
He comes up and punches the side of the beef that Chuck Liddell just got done punching, and he's doing it to like impress Chuck. And we were all watching it together, and I remember looking at you guys and saying, Chuck Liddell is probably thinking like, I would just punch this guy square in the face. And then sure enough, Chuck Liddell a second later goes, well, I mean, I would just run right down the middle like with a punch.
Yeah. Chuck Liddell is like, he's hanging out at your house. He's like your older brother's friend and you're the younger brother, and you walk up to him, you know, Chuck like, you know, finishes his beer and everyone's like, oh yeah. You're like, I could do like 3 of those. It's just like a sad attempt at being cool.
Yeah, just trying to be cool.
He's like trying to network on the show.
There's also a really funny moment when Chuck Liddell first walks in and Alan Tafoya goes, hey, nice haircut. It's like an insult. It's like...
And then Chuck doesn't know how to respond. I mean, Chuck's pretty normal, like on the episode, I think. And he's just like... Right.
Yeah, I don't know if Chuck Liddell was in on the joke, like if he knew that this was a stage show or not. Because I feel like Chuck Liddell's on there and like taking it serious.
He just got a text message that morning. Hey Chuck, we need you to come punch something.
Yeah, are you in town? Can you just stop by? We'll pay you some money.
We'll pay you $100,000 to punch the side of a cow.
He's like, sure, man. Why not?
Yeah.
All right, the knife.
Yeah, the knife.
The Apache knife.
So Snake Blocker returns and goes into a coke-filled knife monologue.
The Apache knife fighter was the greatest knife fighter in the entire world history of guerrilla war fighting tactics. They don't just carry one knife, they'll carry multiple knives. If they could carry 20 knives, they'd carry 20 knives. Why? Because they're gonna throw one at one opponent, they're gonna stab another, grab another weapon. You know, he's there.
Pulls out knives from every orifice. And it's just like there's this chaotic energy. It's like kind of like when your dad's yelling at you, and you can't really, you know, he's just like, and just like pulling knives from everywhere. It's
slamming them onto the table. Yeah, he's like,
it's kind of like Chuck's over your house and he finishes his beer, and you're the little brother. You walk up, I can do like
He's throwing knives on the table, and he's like, the Apaches were by far the greatest knife fighters of all time.
Yeah. And like thinking Chuck's within earshot, he's like, I'm trying to make it's like when your girl, like the girl you like is in the same class as you.
I'd say Chuck's not there for that scene. I think we have more of a Michael Lair type thing going on where Snake Blocker, he's hamming it up for the camera, man. He's trying to make it entertaining.
His ears are hamming it up for himself.
Yeah, that's how he is all the time.
Yeah,
to be fair, Michael Lair
be that intense all the time.
Michael Lair can turn it off. I don't think Snake Blocker can.
Can I tell you my favorite part of this entire test, which I know we're going to touch on?
Yeah.
They go, the knife, he throws it from 15 feet. He goes, throws the knife.
Yeah. He's a foot away.
It is a foot away from the target. It is hitting the target before it even leaves his hand. Like 15 feet.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have anything more to say about the knife, Craig?
It's a knife.
Well, so I guess maybe going to the knife because I have a follow-up question about the piercing buffalo.
Oh yes, we'll talk about the piercing buffalo, but I do want to say. So the knife, again, falls into the problem of like, there's stone knives and then there's iron knives. Obviously, an iron knife's more effective. Which one are they giving the Apache? They test a whole variety of them. I don't know which one the Apache's getting in the sim, but hey, whatever.
Apparently the best one. Have you seen the numbers?
Oh, yes. We can talk about that.
Oh, I want to.
And I think it's because it impresses Max Geiger so much. Like, he's throwing the knives. He throws them at like 4 different targets. And I don't know as though any of those are particular, like, I don't know. They don't test the knife against like a ballistic gel. I noticed they tested against the cardboard targets, and then they tested against like the little punching bag guy you can buy at Dick's Sporting Goods. So of course it like goes right through all of those things. I mean, it's a knife. You can throw it. You can fight hand to hand with it. I don't know as though Apaches carried 15 on them at one time, but I will say this was a particular favorite of the Apache. And it was a custom in Apache tribes that every man, woman, and child carried one, not just as a tool, but you learn to become very adept with it. And Apache knife fighting is, to this day, still very renowned. You know, Alan Tafoya is a knife fighter, and he learned it from the Apache tribes. So I will say there is some legitimacy to the fact that Apaches were extremely proficient knife fighters. It's hard to say any more about it because it's a knife. Like, we all know a knife. These are all fixed blade knives that the Apaches would assemble out of bone and wood, and they'd fix a stone or an iron tip to it. Like, I guess the Apaches are very quick. It's a knife.
Yeah.
It's a knife. I like the picture that they show. Looks like absolute dog shit.
It's like a half an inch long.
Yeah. It's like carved out of dog shit.
So during the demonstration, Snake Blocker uses what I presume is his own special move called the piercing buffalo, where I'll try to put a clip in the edit.
You also got the piercings. They actually call this the piercing buffalo because of the effectiveness of it going straight to the sternum or the heart. It's going to puncture any and everything.
But he turns his back to the enemy and does like a backward stab, which besides just for flair, I think you would have less power from this direction.
So I do have something to say about the piercing buffalo, Craig, because I rewatched the footage multiple times. By the way, could not find anything about a knife technique named the piercing buffalo.
It's almost like you made it up.
Yeah, I couldn't find anything. That's not to say there isn't some term in martial arts for that, but I couldn't find a thing. What I will say is this. When he says the piercing buffalo, initially he says it referring to a move where you stab through the sternum into the heart. And he says, this is why it's called the piercing buffalo, because you can punch this knife right through the chest and into the heart. But then he proceeds to stab the mannequin in other areas, just thrusting, right? Just thrusting the knife. And he goes, piercing buffalo to the face, piercing buffalo to the neck, piercing buffalo to the groin. You know, he pronounces groin funny. And I'm like, so what is, I thought the piercing buffalo had that name because it's a specific technique where you break the sternum and get to the chest, but apparently that's just his name for any time you thrust the knife.
If you put me on the spot to come up with an Apache name for stabbing someone, I'll be, piercing buffalo.
Piercing buffalo is pretty good, right? It's a pretty good fake name for something, but I couldn't find anything about the piercing buffalo. Like, I think Snake Blogger just made that term up, or like that's his term he uses for it.
Yeah, Lucas, it sounds like an anime special move. Like there's a Native American character. Buffalo. Yeah, and in the dub they're like, okay, just call it piercing buffalo. Like, so
breathing technique, piercing buffalo.
Yeah, exactly.
That's all I have to say on the knife and the piercing buffalo.
It's a knife.
Snake Blocker is throwing them at little cardboard targets and yelling. We missed earlier in the episode when he's talking about the Apaches at the beginning. There's an extremely funny scene where he goes, the Apaches would all at the same time let out their war cry. Ah!
It's like,
it's
not even like, ooh, it's like,
yeah, he does like a yell into the camera. Check it out. It's
just like an awkward, like, and they cut it real quick, like cut that.
He probably yelled for like a minute. And also in this demonstration, one of the classic bitch-made defenses from the Gladiator.
Oh yeah.
He throws the knife at the target, and he just like boasts. And the Gladiator guy goes, well, I guess I won't just stand still and let you throw knives.
Oh, yeah.
Like, buddy, shut the fuck up.
A better argument would have been, they do this whole thing where, like, the Gladiator exposes his chest because that's his, like, his pride. A lot of gladiators just wore armor, like, head to toe.
Well, why don't you take over then, Luke? Tell us a little bit about the Gladiator armor. Like, because what we get on the show, I want to add, what we get on the show is in the reenactment and in any of the tests, the only armor the Gladiator seems to have is that helmet, which would protect your noggin, but like is leaving the rest of his body open for attack. They show him with a shield. They never test a shield. Now, on the mannequin of the Gladiator, you see he has like some armor on the mannequin. So it was a little confusing because it's like, is this the Gladiator's armor? I noticed on rewatching the episode, the armor they show on the mannequin is just the armor that Chris Torres wears during the tests when they're messing around with the trident and the net. So I think that's just like the little armor they were testing with, and that's not what they gave the Gladiator in the sim. So I'm interested to hear, Luke, like what kind of, did Gladiators wear armor? Did it depend on their class? Like,
it did. It depended on like one of the 25 plus types that there were. And my best guess at what they were trying to depict in the show was the Thracian, which wasn't even a Roman warrior. It was kind of a foreign warrior that the Romans fought against, that they adopted their kind of fighting style for the arena. And they were the only ones that used, I know we're getting to it soon, the Sika sword. And they were the only ones that wore like a similar armor get up. But most of the Roman gladiators wore armor almost head to toe. And almost every single gladiator used a shield. Unless they were a specialized fighter using like the Caesar or like the Kestis, they had a shield.
Yeah.
With pretty much every other weapon. I know I can just kind of steamroll into the trident net here because that's up next. Because it was used by a gladiator whose name I got to be careful with is called the Rotarius.
Okay.
And it was kind of one of those unique fighters, and they actually wore no armor, no helmet, and only a loincloth. Their only weapon was the trident and net. This was a extremely specialized type of fight, and they would commonly pit these guys up against someone who wore armor head to toe. And it was kind of like a high risk, high reward fight. It was, one of the well-regarded matchups, a lot of anticipation, a lot of people kind of on the edge of the seat because this guy would essentially, he gets like one shot with that net, maybe 2 if he's lucky, to trip that guy up with the armor and hit him with the trident and get a kill shot on him before he gets his head cut off because he has no armor on.
Right.
Lucas, what did you find about the HeroScape unit, also called Rotarius?
I learned about that today. Accurate representation, apparently.
Right. The reason I harped on the armor so much is because in this show, like, the armored warriors usually have such an advantage, but because they only give the gladiator a helmet, like, I feel like it's kind of a useless advantage.
They don't give him an appropriate
because it's
anything.
like, I'm just going to aim for this guy's stomach. Like,
I'm going to butcher this name, but there was even gladiators like the Crupeliarius.
Right.
That's about as good as it's going to get, people. And they were literally head to toe in armor with 0 exposed skin. And they were looked at as like invulnerable and unbeatable in battle. And they pretty much they also carried a large full body shield. How do you get past? I mean, that is a gladiator,
like a
also
big Roman shield.
Essentially, kind of. Yeah, it was like a nice 4-foot rectangle shield, and they wore armor head to toe. Completely. They're only the weakness, which I looked up because I was interested. How do you beat these guys? Because they can't. I mean, why would not every gladiator just try to do that? Their weakness was pickaxes. They would try to knock them down, and the armor that they wore was so heavy that once they were knocked down with kind of like a brute force push on the shield, that they couldn't get back up, and they would use pickaxes to bust through their armor to kill them.
Interesting.
Which I thought was very interesting, but. I mean, most gladiators were heavily armored versus heavily armored, shield versus shield, and they don't even address any of this in the show. It's like the weapons that they choose is like you're taking, like a military guy now, and you give him like a knife and a claymore, and you don't even like address like any of the main weapons that he would use. It's bizarre on the show.
And Chris Torres, he stabs the dummy with the trident. What do you call that? What would you call that type of dummy that is like the blood spurting dummy?
Oh, it's the ballistic gel. That was a ballistic.
Oh,
they just they fill it with little pouches of like blood, essentially, just to replicate blood coming out.
Well, I was going to mention that he stabs the dummy and synthetic blood flies in his eye, and he kind of flinches. I think they mentioned that they're going to factor that into the sim, which is the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
You can blind yourself.
I think they just pick on him that like he's flinchy, and they're like, so what you're saying is we got a squeamish gladiator. It's like, I don't know as though they put that into the sim or not, but they do pick on that guy for a really long time about something like, I mean, he got liquid in his eye, so he blinked. Like,
I mean, the trident was a very obscure weapon, as I've said. There was a very, very common class of gladiator called the Hopulomachus, something along those lines. The pronunciation on these is pretty rough, people. Go ahead and try to. But they used a small shield and spear. The spear was much more common than the trident. So it's very weird that they chose the trident. Why. Yeah, it's almost like, I mean, the trident itself,
I'm
like
waiting
in regards
for Craig to get to the edge here for me to shit on the trident in the net so hard.
Like in regards to the show, it is a spear and the net. I mean, kind of like a spear and a shield would make a lot more sense. Well, I mean, the show got it right. Essentially, they properly showed the use for what it does. The net is used to trip up people or tangle people, and the trident is used to stab and kill. And they got that right. The show represents it in a very fair way. It's just they didn't use that.
Let me say here, the trident is stupid. There's a reason people use spears, and it's because it's a lot more aerodynamic. The trident's a made-up weapon. That's why they're giving
it's for show.
Yeah, it's for show because it's like Poseidon wielded a trident or whatever. That net, for the purposes of this show, that net is useless. The Apache has a bow and arrow. Like I just don't understand. They give the edge to the trident and the net, and I understand the logic of wanting to give the edge to a weapon that's bigger, able to keep an enemy at a distance, right?
Well, it was against the knife, wasn't it?
Yeah, but the knife you can throw, and So I understand like why you would give it the edge, but that they specifically say they're torn on it, and then they give the edge to the Trident. Max Iyer says, I think we have to give the edge to the Trident and net combination. It's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, because the net would be useless, I think, against the Apache. We've already had him establish that the Apache is supposed to be nimble in the simulation as well. I just don't see what advantage. Like, I would rather have a shield than, I know they're trying to replicate what that Gladiator did. I just think, I bring this up to say, like, the Gladiator is at such a disadvantage in this episode because all of his weapons are just like impractical crap.
I will say,
they're trying to pass off as like, oh yeah, look how much damage this Trident does, and it's like, it sucks. Like, no one carried that into battle, and there's a reason why. Like,
yeah, I mean, it's not a battle weapon. The class that did, I will say, where you did say that Apache was nimble, the Gladiators that did carry the Trident were the ones that were no armor and no anything, and they were also regarded as very, very nimble people too. And I came into this full, like, ready to shit on the Trident and net, because it's honestly, I think, even one of my least favorite weapons, where I thought it was stupid. I watched a proper demonstration of it outside of the show, and it kind of changed my opinion watching like someone trained with it, using it instead of just, an actor trying, how do you use this thing? Just flick the net and flick the Trident. Watch a proper demonstration, and it might change your mind a little bit on it. It was a little bit interesting to see how they actually used it. I would actually agree with the edge to the Trident net after watching that.
Okay.
But not based off of how the show portrays it.
Yeah. I have to disagree with it. I just think I understand wanting the bigger weapon. I just don't get how, I mean, you can throw the Apache knife. If the Apache's going to be allowed to carry multiple of them in the simulation.
29.
I think. Yeah, right. Yeah. He's got one in every pocket. I just think that that's way more effective than, a guy throwing a net at the Apache.
Well, our experts disagree, but the edge still goes to the Gladiator.
Yeah.
Until the sim, where they put in some Superman numbers for the knife, apparently.
Yeah, we'll get there. The results.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Go on to the next weapons. I'm really excited. Can you see the excitement on my face for this next weapon? Go ahead. Lead us in, Craig.
Moving on to long range. The Gladiators, of course, use the sling. The demonstration, well, I guess the simulation movie portion shows an escaped Gladiator sees an armada of Roman legionnaires and decides,
like a full cohort of Roman legion.
Yeah, him and his little buddy, this presumably escaped Gladiators, decides it's a good idea to throw a rock at one of the legionnaires with a sling. And I just thought the scene was funny. I guess to start off, Lucas, question: did the Gladiator use a fucking sling?
No. Yeah. What weapons next?
I'm curious to know, like, did Gladiators use any kind of long range weapon?
Yes. Okay, so the Gladiators have never used a sling in arena combat, which is the only combat that they did. There was actually master bowmen were entered into the arenas. And I looked this up because I was like, okay, well, why didn't they give them a bow and arrow? They were the least popular gladiators that there were. And the reason's kind of funny because they were master bowmen, but occasionally a stray shot would go into the crowd and kill someone. So whenever the bowman would come out, everyone would leave the arena because they didn't want to die.
I have a theory about the sling, and I'm just going to put it out there.
It's the generic weapon they give to everyone who they don't know what to give for long range.
I think that the reason they put the sling and the reason they do that little like reenactment that you saw, Craig, is a complete reference to the Gladiator. I forget the exact name of it, but there was a specific rebellion that happened in Rome where like a bunch of gladiators escaped and rebelled and were like in the countryside, like looting, and like the Roman legionnaires had to go like put it down. I think that is them giving a little bit of a, tip of the cap to the Gladiator like slave rebellion.
Gladiators didn't use slings.
Yeah, well, they might have, like what I was saying, they might have when they were out.
But then they're not gladiators. They're rebels at that point. Rebel scum.
So, yeah.
Lucas, something came to mind whenever you talk about the bow in the crowd, because I thought that was a funny visual. You know how like dads bitch whenever like at the Pirates they extend the netting to protect people? You think back in ancient Rome, there were like boomers like, what do you mean you gotta leave?
Back in my day, we sat there and took the arrow.
Yeah. Come on, if it's my time to go, it's my time to go.
Yeah, they're ruining the game.
Yeah, they used bows, but again, it was very specialized gladiators, and no one liked them because of occasional misfires into the crowd.
Yeah. And then they bring out the air gun.
Because the expert doesn't know how to use sling.
Yeah. Like, this isn't fast enough, so they had to buy like
It's
an
almost
air
like
gun.
he's not an expert.
Yeah. I mean, there's not much to say about the air gun. It's just a silly moment.
Yeah. Can I add, Craig, that a piece of like the show lore, I think the sling gets brought on to Deadliest Warrior like 3 or 4 times. It's like one of the
more
most,
than that.
it's like one of the most popular weapons that gets brought on like multiple times like a season. And I think every single time it gets brought on, it gets single digit kills. Like Max Geiger just must not be impressed by slings at all. I will defend the sling for 1 second and say, if you look up people who know how to use a sling, you can, I mean, there used to be slingers in armies, back in like the Roman and Greek times. You can throw a freaking rock out of a sling like 200 yards. And if you're getting hit in the head with like a rock that's been shaped and it's flying like 200 yards through the air and smacks you in the head, like that's going to do some damage.
Yeah, but Matt, I wouldn't just stand there and let you hit me.
Right. Everything they show in the show though sucks. Like I feel like they never have a guy that knows how to use a sling, and so they always input it as like shitty, and it always gets like 1 kill.
Yeah. I think it got 1 kill this time.
I think it's 1 kill in this one. Yeah.
Let me check the numbers here. Drum roll. The sling got 1 kill.
Yeah.
Which is 1 more than it should have because gladiators didn't use slings.
Also, theory throwing it out there. Maybe they use the sling if they're like, well, this warrior never had a long range weapon. They could have gotten a sling somewhere.
I think that's what it is. I think
it's a generic
for like
one to give them.
They couldn't do, I mean, the gladiators had the bow, I guess. They couldn't do, the bow versus the bow. And they're like, who's more iconic? The Apache, they have to have the bow.
Yeah.
Gladiator, give them the sling. I think that's what happened. And yeah, that's us conjecturing what happened behind the scenes, but I'd say that's probably what happened. Let's go ahead and move on to the bow.
Yeah.
It's a bow.
Yeah.
It wins.
So I would say, unless you have anything to say about the bow, Craig.
No, just a production note. I know that Alan complained about the bow construction, said it wasn't very good.
So I have some stuff to say.
I noticed that too. The arrows went really like almost lost energy after like 10 feet.
We're going to talk about that.
Yeah. So Matt, what was wrong with the bow?
So what was wrong with the bow that we see? I have some notes on the bow here. I have a few things to say about the bow that we see. So the bow that we're shown, right? An Apache bow would be 4 feet in length. This was considered a short bow, but Apaches like to carry a bow like that because it was lightweight for long distances. They were typically made from like mulberry or cedar wood, and the strings that they would use was like buffalo sinew, which was like tendons, and fibers they would craft out of them.
Gross.
Well, they used what they had, and the arrow shafts would be made of wood. You would either have notched stone. Alan shows an obsidian blade. You have rust. He says rusted iron tips. I don't know why.
Why not just use regular iron tips?
A regular iron tip. He says because of infection, but I think an iron tip's going to kill you.
I think they left the arrows out overnight by accident in the show. It's rusted iron tips.
Yeah.
And, the feathers they used on the ends of the arrows were like typically hawk or bird of prey feathers. All right. Getting to the specs on this bow. So at a typical Apache draw weight, So for those of you who don't know about bows, you have a draw weight. There's a certain pressure to pull back the string on a bow. The higher your draw weight is, the more velocity that the arrow is going to shoot forward with, right? So they typically had a draw weight between 25 to 40 pounds, and that would give you like a maximum range between like 50 and 100 yards, right? Okay. The bow they show in this demo is clearly not at like a 40-pound draw weight, because at like a 40-pound draw weight, a deer, like an arrow will go straight through a deer at like 25 yards, which is what like Alan is shooting. He's shooting from like 10 feet, like in the like demonstration. Anytime I shoot my bow or I see other people shoot a bow, it's from like 20 to 25 yards typically. And then beyond that is like 30. You set up a pin for like 30 or 35 yards. He's shooting from like 10 feet away, which is ridiculous. And the arrows are barely like sticking into the ballistics gel target. Like you'll notice he shoots an iron broadhead at it.
Rusted iron broadhead.
Rusted iron broadhead at it. And it goes in like 1/4 of an inch or something like that. It doesn't even fully penetrate. I've watched arrows go through deer. They go into wood, like they'll stick into wood. And so that made me realize, okay, he does a test right before the ballistics gel where he shoots it through a chronometer to get the velocity on the arrow. And they shoot it at a wooden target. And it sticks into the wooden target. And then they cut to a shot where the broadhead is all the way through the wooden target. And I thought to myself, well, that doesn't make any sense. How come it went through the wood but not like the ballistics gel? So I rewound it. We have a controversy on our hands, guys. If you watch the shot where Alan shoots the arrow into the wooden target, there's a square on the target and it lands on the right side of the square, in the middle of the right side of the square. When they cut to the next shot, it's like the next shot they cut to, the arrow that is sunk into the wood is in a completely different spot of the target. It's up above the top right corner of the target. And the broadhead is supposedly in the target. However, there is no entry wound. There's no like, line that you can see where it did damage to the wood. I theorized that the bow they got was very weak, had a very low draw weight, and that's probably why Alan Tafoya complained about it. And the arrows could not stick into those wood. I bet you the one he sinks in there stuck in there for like half a second so they could get the shot, and it probably fell out. And I bet you they glued an iron, like a wooden shaft onto that target for the close-up shot. Because I just don't see any other way. Like I was rewinding it and watching it. I'm like, that didn't go in the wood. Like that's not in the wood. So the bow they show, completely fake. I don't know who made it. He didn't know what he was doing. But it seems like they input stats of what a regular bow would be. So
dude, I love finding those now.
Yeah.
Like whenever we're going back, I'm sitting there eating my like Hungry Man TV dinner, like my meatloaf, mashed potatoes. I'm like stirring the gravy into the mashed potatoes, watching
your
and
dogfish head beer next to you.
They moved that bow.
Yeah, right.
They moved that arrow.
It's like, that's a different.
What the shit?
Yeah, I was like, that's a different shot. So I think they give the Apache the proper specs on his bow, but the bow they show. Oh, the last thing I'll mention about it is they do that stupid sound effect for every single shot that we see. And it's like there's a montage where he's shooting it and they cut it like back to back, like 20 shots in a row, and they do that sound effect. It's like. Like every single shot. So I would agree with the edge going to the bow. I know you can get a good distance on a sling. Bow to me seems like a more versatile and more effective weapon, like an iron tip going into your stomach or your heart is like going to be extremely lethal. Getting hit in the head with a rock can kill you. Obviously, it could do some serious damage, but I don't know. But bows are still around today, man. There's not many people using slings out there.
Now, what if the gladiator?
Not the gladiators.
What if the gladiator has an air gun?
Right. If the gladiator has an air gun, he might have an advantage at long range. I just, like a portable air gun. But I'll agree. The Apaches were really, Native Americans in general were really proficient archers.
That's what you think of. It's when you think of like Apache Indian, you think of bow.
I actually have a little, they quote on here that the narrator says that an Apache can shoot up to 15 arrows per minute. I think he just made that specific. I don't know where he cited that from, but Native Americans and I know the Mongols too had rapid fire techniques where you can look up, there's some archers that do this today where they hold multiple arrows in their draw hand at one time. And, so it would be one between the forefinger and middle finger, one between the ring finger and the middle finger, one between the pinky and the ring finger, right? And they would pull back and do like boom, boom, boom. They would shoot it in like rapid succession. And it's neat. It's cool. Look up videos of guys doing that. It's pretty cool. And if Apache's doing that, they could get off 15 arrows in a minute for sure.
They shoot it in rapid succession like my rhymes.
Kind of like that.
Bars,
Okay.
I kind of like that. Yeah.
So we agree with the edge to the Apache?
Yes.
Yeah, that's all I have to say on the bow.
Let me wrap that up by saying gladiators didn't use slings. Edge bow.
Okay. That's fair.
Now, if you're in the comments section, do not tell us that you're the guy in the red shirt and that gladiators use slings, all right? I don't want to hear it.
I don't want to fucking hear it. That's not a joke.
Let me say it for the guys in the back. Gladiators didn't use slings.
Moving on. So the last section of the program, besides the sim, is special weapons. And the entire special weapons segment takes about 3 minutes.
Yeah.
It's just extremely short. I think they ran out of time. I'd like to see the Snyder cut where you see the special weapons in full, but
yeah,
we may never get
we
that.
We even get a shot at the beginning of the show that they just kind of play for a second where Dietrich is stabbing the Sika up into a chest cavity on a ballistics gel. We don't get that shot in the test.
I like to think that when they cut it short, something broke.
Yeah.
Although I guess one of them did break. So
yeah, the segment of Snake Blocker talking about like poison arrows, she just has a scorpion with no context.
Mm-hmm.
So that was cut. So
yeah.
I imagine that's just TV, but anyway, extremely short segment. We first have the Sega demonstration featuring the iconic ballistic gel arm.
They make an arm. I don't know if that's to test if it can cut limbs, but then they put a metal rod in the middle of it.
A steel rod.
Yeah, a steel rod, so obviously it's not going to cut through that.
Hey, it cut everything down to the steel rod.
Yeah, right. What a shock.
It's one of the most forgettable demonstrations on the entire show, I think. So it's a very weird weapon. I assume the curve is for maybe getting around shields and armor. What did you find out about this weapon?
That it's used by a very specialized form of gladiator. That 90%. Okay, here's the biggest bullshit thing. This is going to be my biggest complaint section of this entire thing. The gladiator name came from the Roman sword, the gladius, which they failed to mention at all, which was the 90% of gladiators used the gladius sword. And about 2% use the Sika sword.
Season 2, the Roman legionnaire uses the gladiator.
He does, because that's the sword. It is actually the Thracian that used that Sika sword, which I think I referenced earlier.
Yeah.
It was a foreign soldier that the Romans kind of copied their fighting style. And it was commonly at a 45-degree angle, I believe. And it was used for getting around shields. And they saw this in combat, the Roman foot soldiers. And they're like, oh, we got to bring this sword back to Rome and use it in our arenas. And it became like a show sword, but very, very, very few gladiators used it. They completely glanced over like the main sword where the gladiators got their name from.
Yeah.
And I do gotta just pick a bone here. And I know we're gonna be touching this, but we're practically at the end anyway. Why did a sword get less kills than a knife?
Well, we can get into that, but when in the results section, I do want to just say real quick, what do we think, guys? Should this have just been Roman Legionnaire versus Apache Warrior?
It would have made more sense.
Would have been a more entertaining episode, I think.
Just that's what I'm saying.
They could lopsided.
They could have an episode itself of which gladiator is best, because there's just too many variations.
Yeah.
They touched on 4 out of maybe 100 variations of like weapons that they used, but they used the most obscure, ridiculous. It's like they shot themselves in the foot. They're that Sarah Sheriff that shot himself in the leg trying to draw his weapon.
I think they just picked stuff that would be entertaining.
I think that's what it boiled down to. I mean, they could have had the shield. They could have had the gladius. They could have had, much more common, the spear.
Yeah.
But it would have been boring, I mean, we just saw that essentially it would have been the same loadout as the Spartan, and we just saw that. Mm-hmm. So I think they were trying to reach outside the box, and it kind of, this episode, in my opinion,
the gladiator pays for it, shakes my head. It's sad to see.
Even that helmet, there were so many variations on that helmet. That was a very rare helmet that very few gladiators wore. There were so many variations in helmets.
Think of all those poor gladiators that died in the sim, dog.
I think this is just the gladiator is just a bad choice of a warrior for this show, and they did a bad job of picking his weapons to properly represent him.
Yeah.
Him or her. I don't know if there was female gladiators, but just cover my ass.
Torres to determine. Yeah. Moving on to the War Club, just to describe the demonstration. The War Club breaks. Well, first he smashes the skull, I believe.
I do have something to say in defense of the War Club. I'll let you finish first here.
So he smashes the skull, and then they say, well, a gladiator is going to be wearing a helmet. And Snake Blocker acts all tough, and he clean breaks the club off of the helmet, and then in anger throws the handle back at the crew. And then he gets very defensive and cries and says that the gladiator would have gotten tired because the helmet was so heavy, which is, I think, maybe tops some of our greatest excuses on Deadliest Warrior. And I don't think he's acting. I think this is the real Snake Blocker getting all defensive. But anyway, it's an interesting bit. Any information on the War Club?
Yes. So I actually have something to say about the War Club we're shown and the War Club that would have actually been used. War Clubs were typically just a solid piece of wood. It's literally just like a piece of hardwood that you hit a guy in the head with.
Bonk. You get the bonk sound with it too.
And I want to bring back, I brought up the Jawbone Club before. Something made from the jawbone of a horse or the leg of a bison, right? Apaches specialized in a particular war club that was made from horse jaws or bison legs. There's these big claw, you leave the horse teeth in there, so it's like sharp too. These things were brutal. You can look them up, Apache jawbone clubs. I think that's what they're trying to reference, but what we're given is such a weird thing. It's a rock wrapped in rawhide attached to a stick. Why would you wrap the rock in rawhide? I don't know. I guess to keep it on the club, but that would blunt the force of the rock. What we're seeing in interviews, so when Snake Blocker's getting interviewed and he's holding the club, it's one solid piece. It's one solid club. But the club we're given in the demonstrations has kind of a dangly end on it. It flails about. You can see as he's moving, it's almost like the rock is in a pouch attached to the stick, and it kind of free blah 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 blah, bobbles about in there. And so I'm not shocked when he hits it enough times that it breaks, because all that is the rawhide separating from the stick. It's like the thread being cut because he's hitting it too hard. Now, would a regular hardwood club have shattered onto a bronze helmet? Maybe. But I think if you took a really solid piece of hardwood and hit a guy on a helmet, you would do some form of like at least concussion, stun damage. I'm not arguing that he'd get a kill or that this should have gotten the edge, but I am saying it would have performed a lot better than just hitting him in the, like, what they show is such a flimsy little like thing. It's a shitty war club. Like, it's what it is. I looked around and I saw no example of any Native American war club that was what they showed on here at like this flimsy little rock on the end of a stick. So I wrote in my notes, potentially rigged to break, question mark.
I'd rather have a sword at the end of the day.
I'm not arguing that.
Yeah.
I'm saying I think what we were shown was extremely inaccurate to what like an Apache.
That seems to be the theme of at least my side of the episode too.
Would have been cool to see a Jawbone Club. Would have been cool to see like that horse jaw club like going up against that helmet, see if it at least leaves some dents in it.
They probably didn't want to have any like legal obligations of like horse bone.
Yeah, maybe.
Is horse anything legal? Because I know.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you're right. Like no animals being harmed in the making of it or whatever. But I mean, they're using rawhide and stuff that they take from animals.
Oh, that's fine.
It's not like they shot the horse for it. Helen Tafoya is like, "Come here, bitch," and slices the throat.
No, you want to get it fresh.
Where do you think they got the glue for the arrow?
So, yeah, I guess that's all I have to say on the war club. I agree with that. I agree with the fact that it doesn't get the edge, but I think it's kind of demonstrated very like a crappy version of it is what's demonstrated.
My biggest complaint, I think the Sika, the sword, it is a funky sword. I wish they would have used the Gladius, which is just essentially the straight Roman's foot soldier sword. It gets only 116 kills. I think it was very underrepresented. I mean, it's a sword. It should have. I think that should have been like the top performing weapon.
Well,
for the Gladiator.
Do you want to get into the results, Craig, and then we could talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, one last thing about special weapons. There are odd choices for special weapons. Like when I think special weapons, I think stuff that
Trident and net.
Or
maybe
why didn't the Kestis and the scissors be a special weapon?
Everything else on the Gladiators like thing. Essentially, I've been saying that the whole time too. Literally, repetitive record. Everything is a special weapon except the sword that they classify as the special weapon. It's like the only kind of like normal weapon that they present.
Or like, I know it wasn't classified in the last episode, but like a Ninja Black Egg is like the definition of a special weapon. It's like, has a unique stunning power.
That just gets put as the medium range weapon.
So a curvy sword and then a club aren't that special. I feel like they could fill easily a lot of these other categories, but moving on finally to the sim. Snake Blocker again holds that scorpion for no reason in the interview. A note I had is that at that point, it seemed like they're having a lot of fun, I think, in a demonstration. Like, unlike maybe Green Brave or Spetsnaz, there's no animosity here, and I think that they had a great time, I think, especially given what Snake Blocker said in his notes. But we have the demonstration, which, not a ton to say about it. One other thing from the Yumpu article for fans of these reenactments is the Gladiator looks to the crowd for approval. So he's standing over the Apache, ready to finish him off. And he kind of hesitates. And according to Snake Blocker, you don't really see his face, so maybe they just cut it. But that's supposed to be the Gladiator looking for approval in an empty field in Los Angeles. And that's ultimately what gives the Apache the chance. I mean, it's a reenactment, so who cares? But I just thought it was silly. And I think Snake Blocker even mentions when he describes this that, well, the Gladiator is always looking for approval and the Apache didn't need it. Like almost like that's something they factored into the sim. Whatever. So moving on to the kills. So Apache wins, of course.
How did the sword get less kills than a knife?
Yeah, let's listen.
Craig, I got a question.
Okay.
Have you seen those warriors from Hammerfell? They've got curved swords. Curved swords.
I was thinking it, but I didn't want to say it. So the Apache, the bow gets 188 kills, which is more than any Gladiator weapon. Tomahawk gets 153, almost more than any gladiator weapon.
Mhm.
The club gets 60. Knives 266 to total 667 kills, pretty much an even
Absolute
2/3.
Beat down.
Yeah, that's pretty significant. Gladiator, the Kestis gets 25.
What's
And
Why?
so does the scissor. No,
Yeah.
I bet they both got 50 and they split it down the middle.
I think so too, because I've always wondered about how convenient that was that a Kestis gets 25 and a scissor also gets 25.
I bet the Kestis got 0 and the scissor got 50 because it's an actual weapon.
Yeah.
Or they're just like the sim just inputs close range.
Yeah.
And they couldn't do both.
I want to
So-
see the simulation where the Kestis wins and he's just
He's left and right.
he's just punching him with those stupid gloves.
Yeah. The Trident got 166, the best performing weapon. Sling, as we mentioned, 1 kill. And the Sika, 116 for a total of 333 kills. So a clean third.
Yeah.
So, Lucas, why were the Gladiator weapons so ineffective?
Improper input into the sim. I agree with most of the numbers. The only one I don't agree with is I think the sword was improperly. I don't think they demonstrated enough. I don't think we heard it. I mean, it was glanced over at the very end. I think it should have been highlighted. They should have used the Gladius. I mean, it's a sword.
I have an opinion on all this.
I think the Apache is unarmored. And for some reason, they showed the Gladiator with the shield and sword in the sim, but they didn't address the shield. The Gladiator, I think, just turned into a mess, and they really didn't know what data to even put into the sim. It just kind of turned into...
Gladiator's given a sim in the reenactment. They never test one or mention it in the show. So I don't even know if he's got one in the simulation.
The shield?
Other than the shield, he's got a helmet. What I noticed about the Apache's weapons was that almost all of them could kill from like a distance, like the bow, the knife, the tomahawk, and that the Apache was being marketed as like a warrior that had a lot of agility, like had the speed advantage. Because we talked about in Spartan versus Ninja how there's always like one warrior's like stronger and one warrior's faster, right? Like the ninja's the fast one. The Apache's the fast one. The Gladiator's the slow one and the strong one, but he doesn't have any armor to protect him. And so I think that Apache was just able to tear him apart at every range. And listen, I can't speak to why a knife gets like almost twice the number of kills.
Why does the Tomahawk not have more?
More than twice the amount of kills than like...
Or the bow itself
sword.
too. Instead of pulling out the bow, you're telling me he pulled out the knife and threw that instead of using the bow. Like
my guess is that the Apache, that was their go-to weapon, and Max Geiger was so thrilled that like he got 4 kill shots in like 4 seconds. Other than that, I don't know, but I will say I agree with, for of course I always attach the edge for what it's worth. I agree that the Apache wins here. I think Gladiator, it is an entertainer at the end of the day, and they give him a lot of like flashy weapons that are kind of useless, whereas Apaches are an extremely proven like warrior culture, and all the weapons they bring. The War Club that they demonstrate is pretty lame, but the other ones are all like, it's a bow and arrow, it's a tomahawk, it's a knife. These are like enduring human weapon systems that can kill you. I mean, I guess, those are my thoughts on
this episode for me is just too obscure of titles being thrown around. I think like it's the Gladiator itself versus like the Apache. They're just two things that there's like 1,000 variations of it. Like
sure,
each one, I think the Gladiator more than the Apache, but and I think it's just like the Apache. It's probably good weapon choices for them, but the Gladiator, I have like no opinion on the outcome of this episode. I wasn't very excited for the outcome of this episode because it like, I don't know. The Gladiator to me is just like its own thing. Like there's just too many variations to it.
Deadliest Warriors definition of a Gladiator.
Yeah, it's just whatever their definition is, and I think it was a weird definition. So the outcome to this one, I have like no opinion either way, honestly. Like,
yeah, I mean, the thesis I garnered from this is just the Apache, for lack of a better word, is just scrappier. You know, the weapons are way more versatile, you know, not that they factor it in, but they culturally, I think they live off the land, and that sort of plays into how scrappy they are compared to the Gladiator. A lot more rigid, both physically and like, you know, they're slaves that fight in an arena. So I tried to read too deep into it because it's Deadliest Warrior, and it's kind of surface level how much they actually include in the sim. But yeah, I think scrappiness is probably, to me, the number one trait that an Apache would have had that would have been a Gladiator.
They're probably better warriors, honestly. The thing, I researched too deep. I did the opposite to you, and I just kept, like, I was getting annoyed almost. Like, why'd they use that?
Yeah.
What? They didn't even talk about this.
I will say you researched a ton into Gladiators, and that was not my experience. Like, I researched, you know, I did research into Apache and like their weapons so that I could show respect enough, because there's probably people out there that know a lot about this stuff.
Oh, there's people who know way more than we're ever going to know.
I didn't want to sound like a complete buffoon, but like, I will say I did not have to do nearly as much research. I think because Apaches are still around and their history is so recorded that, I don't know, pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I researched a lot of Snake Blocker, and I'd like to thank Yumpu.com. I will put the link to the article down in the description so you guys can read what's probably the best write-up of Deadliest Warrior you'll ever see. Any final thoughts, gentlemen?
Ready for the next episode.
Yeah.
Honestly,
I'm ready for the next episode too, man.
After researching this one and everything, we're at the outcome now. I'm kind of over this episode.
Yeah, I'll say that too. Like, so this is, I looked ahead. So the Ninja and the Spartan is the third biggest beatdown in the regular season of these first 9 episodes. Apache and Gladiator, the second biggest beatdown. So there's only one more big beatdown left to come. And I think that contributes into this being like a boring episode, because it's just like, it's kind of obvious, like all the way throughout. At least it was to me, that like rewatching this, I was like, the Apache is going to smoke the Gladiator. Like, what's the Gladiator's got, like a glove and a net? Like, get the fuck out of here, dog. So I'm ready for the next episode. I think it's going to be
sorry, Chuck Liddell.
We love, hey, Chuck Liddell. Hey.
Yikes, man.
Come on.
Yeah, if you want to come on the pod.
Come on and talk about your experience. I saw you in the after show learning how to throw a tomahawk.
Yeah. Hey, I do want to ask you guys before we go. We have our list of the top 10 experts. We're going to throw Snake Blocker on there. We'll vote on this at the end of the season, but who do you think's better, Snake Blocker or Michael Lair? Who's your preferred?
Michael.
Yeah. Yeah, Michael Lair.
Who would I rather have a beer with? Michael Lair. Who is most memorable? Snake Blocker.
Oh, yeah.
I love Michael Lair, but I do think he is acting, whereas Snake Blocker is Snake Blocker the entire time.
He lives that life.
That's interesting.
He goes to Rite Aid as Snake Blocker.
Yeah.
He goes to the grocery store as Snake Blocker. He comes on Deadliest Warrior as Snake.
He's always a character.
Blocker.
Yeah, so I would put him pretty high.
Awesome.
And then the Gladiator experts I would put as low as can possibly go. Nothing personal. I just think they're not very memorable. Yeah. But
I'm excited for Viking versus Samurai, baby.
Yeah.
That'll be a much better matchup.
Check in next week. I'll be representing the Samurai. Lucas, I think, is getting the Viking.
You know, I always got the big boy.
Yeah, we may be having a special guest as well. So stay tuned for our first special guest. But if nothing else, thank you for watching, and tune in next time to the Deadliest Warrior podcast.